What if I told you that the bread eaten by the pyramid builders was sour as vinegar, and their beer had to be chewed rather than drunk? Ancient Egyptian cuisine was a world of flavors so far removed from our own. We imagine the feasts of the pharaohs to be full of exotic fruits and roasted meats, but the reality of everyday food was quite different. It was a cuisine born of the fertile silt of the Nile, the scorching sun. Salt was available, but sugar as we know it was unknown, and dates and wild honey served as the main sweets. Watch this video to the end to find out which dish was considered so sacred that its recipe was known only to a handful of priests and why it disappeared forever.
Dip the bread deep, the stew is rich today.
And the beer is cool. We will be ready for tomorrow's work.
I will reveal the most closely guarded secret. Bread was not just food, it was the foundation of Egyptian civilization, but its taste would shock you. This bread, known as ta, was the staple diet of both the pharaoh and the common peasant. It was baked from emmer, an ancient variety of wheat that is very different from modern grains. Emmer produced a dark, dense flour with low gluten content. The process of making flour was incredibly laborious and imperfect. Women spent hours grinding grain on stone mills, moving a heavy stone back and forth. Because of this, stone chips and sand inevitably got into the flour. Dental studies of mummies show the terrible condition of the teeth of the ancient Egyptians. Their teeth were worn down almost to the gums precisely because of the constant consumption of such abrasive bread. Yeast in its modern form was unknown to the Egyptians. To raise the dough, they used a sourdough technique very similar to that used for artisan bread today. A piece of old dough, the starter, was saved and added to the new batch. This fermentation process gave the bread a very pronounced sour taste, which might seem unpleasant to modern people. However, it was this acidity. Baking methods also differed greatly from ours. The most ancient method was to bake flatbread directly on hot stones or in hot ashes. Later, special clay molds called beja appeared. These cone-shaped vessels were first heated to a high temperature, then filled with dough and placed in the oven. The bread was baked, taking on the characteristic conical shape that we often see in images in tombs. For mass production, for example, to feed the pyramid builders, there were entire bakeries. Archaeologists on the Giza Plateau have discovered the remains of such bakeries with dozens of baking molds. Bread was baked on an industrial scale because, along with beer, it was the main form of payment for labor. A worker received several flatbreads or cones of ta bread for his daily labor. This bread was the foundation on which the pyramids were built. It would be very interesting to hear your point of view. What do you think about such a diet where every bite contains sand? Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel to be the first to learn about the secrets of ancient civilization. Are you ready to learn the truth about how Egyptian beer was thick like porridge and saved entire cities from starvation? When we talk about ancient Egyptian beer, or henket, we need to forget about the modern cold and filtered drink. Egyptian beer was thick, opaque, nutritious, and low in alcohol. It was not so much a drink for pleasure. The production of henket was closely linked to bread baking. The main raw material was the same emmer and sometimes barley. The flour was used to make special, lightly baked bread. These breads, rich in starch and enzymes, were the basis for the wort. They were crumbled into large clay vessels and poured with water. The process was very similar to the preparation of kvass. The key ingredient that started the process was dates. They were added to the wort not only for sweetness, but also to obtain wild yeast that lived on their skin. Sometimes herbs or honey were added for flavor, but dates were a mandatory ingredient. The mixture was left to ferment for several days in a warm climate. The result was a drink that resembled liquid porridge or thick soup. It was cloudy with a lot of sediment and grain residue. It was not drunk in the sense that we understand it, but rather eaten or drunk through special straws with filters at the end. These filters, which are often found in tombs, were needed to strain out the sediment. The alcohol content of such beer was low, probably no more than 2 to 3%. Its main value was its nutritional value. Thanks to its high content of carbohydrates, B vitamins, and protein from grain, henket was a vital source of calories. For ordinary workers, like bread, beer was a form of payment for labor. Pyramid builders, soldiers, and officials received their wages in the form of measures of beer and bread. There were clear standards. For example, a simple worker could receive 1 or 2 measures per day, while a high-ranking official could receive 5 or 10. Beer was Egypt's liquid economy, stable and understandable to everyone. This drink was food, salary, and medicine. Do you think modern society could exist on such a liquid diet? In the next chapter, we will talk about a dish that was so rare that it was prepared only for the gods. What I am about to show you was only available to pharaohs and priests. The secret of this dish was guarded better than the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. We are talking about the mysterious shen cakes, which were not so much food as a powerful religious symbol. Their images are found in the most sacred parts of temples and tombs, always in the context of offerings to the highest deities. The name Shen comes from the Egyptian hieroglyph meaning ring or circle. This symbol represented eternity, the endless cycle of life and divine protection. The cakes themselves were probably round in shape, symbolizing this concept. By offering Shen to the gods, the Egyptians asked for eternal life and protection. It was not just a treat, but an edible prayer. Unlike the bread ta or beer henket, the recipe for Shen was not publicly available. It was considered sacred knowledge, jealously guarded by the priests of the temple kitchens. It was a dish intended exclusively for the gods and, on rare occasions, for the pharaoh as a living god. Mere mortals were not allowed to prepare or taste it. Although the exact recipe has been lost, we do have some clues. Images show that Shen was made from very high-quality white flour. Most likely it was sifted repeatedly to remove impurities, which already made it an incredibly expensive product. It was the complete opposite of the coarse bread with sand eaten by workers. The main difference from ordinary bread was the rich additives. A large amount of honey, the most expensive sweetener in Egypt. It may also have contained crushed nuts, such as almonds or pistachios, which had to be imported. Another possible ingredient was dried dates or figs, turned into a paste. Some researchers believe that Shen also contained more exotic ingredients, such as cinnamon or other spices brought from distant countries. This turned the cake into a real luxury item, worthy of the divine table. The aroma of such pastries, filling the temple, was considered the fragrance of the gods. The cooking process was strictly ritualized. The baker priest had to be in a state of ritual purity. They recited special incantations at each stage, from sifting the flour to removing the finished cakes from the oven. It was believed that without these rituals, the Shen would not acquire its magical power and would be rejected by the gods. If you like this mysterious fact, be sure to like this video.
Accept this sacred bread, O great Sobek. May your favor be upon Egypt.
What if I told you that everything you knew about food storage was invented by the Egyptians thousands of years ago, but their main delicacy today would seem inedible to us? The Nile was the source of life for Egypt, providing not only water for the fields, but also a huge amount of fish. However, in the hot climate, fresh fish spoiled in a matter of hours. The Egyptians became masters of preservation, turning a perishable product into a strategic reserve. The main method of preservation was salting. Fish, most often mullet or tilapia, were gutted, but not always. Then they were generously sprinkled with salt. The salt drew all the moisture out of the fish, making it unsuitable for bacterial growth. This process was so important that the workers involved in salting were a separate and highly sought-after caste of artisans. After salting, the fish was laid out to dry in the scorching sun. It was hung on special poles or simply laid out on mats. In this form, it could be stored for months without losing its nutritional properties. It was the ideal food for soldiers on campaign or for peasants during the period when the Nile did not flood. Sometimes the technology was made more complex. After gutting and salting, the fish could be pressed. It was laid in layers in large vats, and a heavy weight was placed on top. This allowed even more moisture and fat to be removed. The result was dense, compressed briquettes of salted fish. The Egyptians also used natron, a natural mixture of soda and salt, which was also used for other, more well-known processes. Although natron was a key component in preserving the bodies of the deceased, its culinary use was also widespread. Fish treated with natron acquired a specific taste and texture, which were probably highly valued at the time. But it wasn't just fish that underwent this treatment. The Egyptians were big fans of waterfowl, ducks and geese. To preserve their meat, the birds were also gutted, rubbed with salt and spices, and then dried in the sun. These salted delicacies were not just food for the poor, but also an important export commodity. Egypt supplied its salted fish to neighboring countries that did not have such an abundant source of protein. It was an important element of international trade, bringing considerable income to the pharaoh's treasury. The ancient Egyptians did not know cane sugar, but that does not mean that their lives were devoid of sweetness. Honey served as the main sweetener. Beekeeping was a highly developed craft in Egypt. Honey was incredibly valuable and was mainly available to the wealthy and priests. It was not only a delicacy, but also a medicine and an important ingredient in embalming. However, for most of the population, dates were the main source of sweetness. The date palm was one of the most revered trees in Egypt. It provided not only shade and material for construction, but also nutritious, very sweet fruits. Dates were eaten fresh, dried, and in the form of a thick paste, which served as the basis for many desserts. Another popular delicacy was figs, or sycamore. Sycamore fruits were not as sweet as dates, but they were very affordable. They were also dried, cured, and added to baked goods. Fresh figs were considered a wonderful dessert on their own. They were valued for their juiciness and delicate taste in a hot climate. One of the most unusual and forgotten ingredients for sweets was chufa tubers, or tiger nuts. These small tubers, which grow in the ground, have a pleasant, sweet, nutty flavor. They were eaten raw as well as dried, ground, and added to dough. The desserts themselves, or tebi, which was a general term for offerings, were often baked goods. In essence, these were the world's first honey cakes or muffins. I discovered this by accident, but it seems that the basis of modern Mediterranean cuisine was born not in Greece, but in Egypt, in a simple pot belonging to a poor man. Meat was a rarity on the table of the ordinary Egyptian, so vegetable soups and stews formed the basis of their hot meals. These dishes were thick, filling, and flavorful, and it was they that gave strength for hard physical labor. The main vegetables in Egypt were onions, garlic, and leeks. They were cultivated in huge quantities in gardens along the Nile. Herodotus mentioned that a huge amount of garlic and onions were used to feed the workers who built the Pyramid of Cheops. These vegetables were valued not only for their taste, but also for their antiseptic properties, which were important in crowded living conditions. The second most important component was legumes. Lentils, chickpeas, peas, and beans were the main source of vegetable protein. The most common dish was a thick lentil soup seasoned with garlic and coriander. This simple but incredibly nutritious dish has not changed much over the millennia. The cooking process was straightforward. Vegetables and legumes were placed in a large clay pot, covered with water. A little salt was added, and the pot was placed on an open fire. The dish simmered on low heat for several hours, turning into a thick, homogeneous stew. It was eaten with pieces of dense bread called ta. The Egyptians actively used herbs and spices to add flavor. The most popular were coriander, cumin, and dill. Their seeds and greens were added to soups, giving them a characteristic spicy aroma. These spices were also grown in Egypt and were available to all segments of the population. One of the most surprising vegetables in the Egyptian diet for us was lettuce. However, they did not eat it raw, as we are accustomed to. Lettuce in ancient Egypt was a tall plant with tough leaves and was valued for its milky sap. The leaves and stems were most likely boiled or stewed with other vegetables, adding juiciness to the dish. The recipes for these vegetable stews have been lost because they were never written down. They were part of
Like
an
this,
oral
grandmother?
culinary tradition that each housewife passed
Remember, my
on to her daughter.
The lentils and the
With the
emmer
change
must
in the
simmer
range of
until
vegetables
soft.
available,
This is the
especially
way
with the
of our
advent of
ancestors.
potatoes, the old
You must
recipes
watch
for
the
soups
lentils
made from
closely,
emmer,
child.
lentils,
Stir the
and
emmer
lettuce
until it is
were
thick
finally
like
forgotten.
this.
When do we add the lettuce, Mother?
Although Egypt is primarily associated with beer, winemaking, Irep, was no less developed here. However, unlike beer, wine was an elite drink. It was intended for the pharaoh, his court, high officials, and priests. Vineyards were concentrated mainly in the Nile Delta and in oases where the climate was more suitable. The Egyptians produced both red and white wine. On the walls of the tombs, we see detailed depictions of the entire process. Workers gathered grapes in baskets and then pressed them with their feet in large vats. The resulting juice was poured into large clay amphorae. There it fermented, turning into wine. The Egyptians were the first to come up with the idea of sealing the amphorae with clay stoppers. The most surprising fact is that the Egyptians labeled their wine. They put a seal on the clay stopper, or on the amphora itself. This seal contained all the key information: the year of harvest, place of origin, name of the winemaker, and even a quality rating, such as good or very good. The most famous and, alas, lost variety of wine was Sheed. It was a sweet, strong wine made from a special variety of grapes, possibly slightly dried in the sun. It was incredibly highly prized, mentioned in poetry, and considered a drink for special celebrations. The exact recipe and the grape variety from which it was made have been lost. In addition to grape wine, the Egyptians made wines from other fruits. Date wine was very popular, as it was stronger and sweeter. They also made drinks from pomegranates and figs. These fruit wines were more affordable than grape wine, but were still considered festive drinks. Wine played an important role in religion and the cult of the afterlife. It was associated with the blood of the god Osiris. It was believed that drinking wine at celebrations allowed one to commune with divine power. The tombs of wealthy Egyptians were literally filled with amphorae of wine to provide the deceased with their favorite drink for all eternity. The lotus was one of the most powerful and ubiquitous symbols of ancient Egypt. It represented birth, the creation of the world, and rebirth after death. This flower emerging from murky waters was an image of purity and sunshine. But beyond its deep symbolic meaning, the lotus was also an important food source, something that has been completely forgotten today. The inhabitants of the Nile Delta, especially in ancient times, actively consumed various parts of this plant. First of all, they valued its rhizomes. The roots of both white and blue lotuses are rich in starch and quite nutritious. They were dug out of the muddy bottom, cleaned, and prepared. In taste and texture, cooked lotus roots resembled modern potatoes or sweet potatoes. It was an affordable source of carbohydrates for people living in swampy areas. In years of poor harvest, when the Nile floods were insufficient, lotus seeds were also eaten. They were collected from the ripe flower capsules. The seeds could be eaten raw and had a pleasant nutty flavor, but more often they were dried and then ground into flour. This flour, mixed with emmer flour, was used to bake flatbread. Herodotus, who visited Egypt, described this process. He said that the Egyptians collected lilies, as he called them, dried them in the sun, and then ground the seeds and baked bread from them. This confirms that the lotus was not an exotic delicacy, but an everyday food. Young stems and unopened buds were also used in cooking. They were probably boiled and eaten as a vegetable dish, similar to modern asparagus. They added variety to a diet that consisted mainly of bread and soup. The blue lotus, unlike the white lotus, also had a special ritual significance. It is believed to have had mild psychoactive properties. Its flowers are often depicted at feasts, where guests inhale their fragrance. It may have been added to wine to enhance its intoxicating and euphoric effects. Meat, or yuf in ancient Egyptian, was a symbol of wealth and status. For the vast majority of the population, it was only available on major holidays. In everyday life, protein was obtained from fish, poultry, and legumes. Real red meat was the prerogative of temples, the pharaoh, and the nobility. The most prestigious and desirable type of meat was beef. Bulls and oxen were not only a source of draft power, but also the main sacrificial animals. In tomb paintings, we often see scenes of fattened bulls being slaughtered. Their meat was considered the food of the gods, and the best cuts were sacrificed in temples. After the ritual was performed, the meat was distributed. Some remained with the priests, some was sent to the pharaoh's palace, and some could be distributed to the participants of the festival. Thus, the consumption of beef was closely linked to religious life. It was not just a matter of satisfying hunger, but an act of communion with the divine. In addition to beef, the Egyptians valued and bred other ungulates. The estates of the nobility had entire pens, where antelopes such as oryx and gazelles were kept. These wild animals were tamed and fattened like domestic livestock. Their meat was considered a delicacy and was served at lavish feasts. There were various ways of cooking meat. The simplest and most common was roasting over an open fire. Large pieces of meat were skewered on wooden spits and cooked over coals. This method was ideal for outdoor feasts. However, there were also more complex recipes. Meat was often stewed in large clay pots. It was cooked for hours over low heat with onions, garlic, and herbs, such as cumin and coriander. The result was a tender, aromatic stew that was served with bread. If meat dishes were the food of the elite, then emmer soup was the fuel that powered the entire Egyptian civilization. It was the simplest, cheapest, and most common dish, feeding millions of workers, peasants, and soldiers. And it is one of the most forgotten, as it was not honored with lavish depictions in tombs. The basis of this soup was the same emmer, or spelt, but for the soup, crushed or whole grains were used instead of flour. The grain was boiled in water in a large cauldron until it swelled and turned into a thick, sticky porridge. It was a simple but very filling and high-carbohydrate dish. On its own, this porridge was bland and tasteless. To give it some flavor, readily available ingredients were added. Salt was an essential component. For greater satiety, legumes, such as lentils, were often added to emmer porridge. The mixture of grains and legumes provided the body with a complete set of essential amino acids and protein. It was an ideal combined dish for people engaged in heavy physical labor. Archaeological finds in the villages of pyramid builders in Giza confirm the importance of this dish. Huge kitchens and barns designed to store emmer and lentils were found. The remains of clay pots with traces of this soup are found in garbage pits. This food was the standard diet. Workers received their daily ration in the form of bread, beer, and a bowl of hot soup. It was a simple but balanced diet that provided enough energy to carry multi-ton stone blocks. Unlike the bread, which required a complex baking process, soup was easy to prepare on a large scale. All that was needed was a large pot, water, grain, and fire. It could be cooked right at the work site, providing workers with hot meals. We have traveled back in time, peering into the pots and cups of a civilization that no longer exists. From sour bread with sand to thick, porridge-like beer and sacred cakes of the gods, this cuisine challenges our modern ideas about food. It was based on silt, sun, and labor. The history of cooking is endless, and every era has its secrets. What other forgotten dishes or culinary traditions would you like to learn about? Perhaps you are interested in the table of a Roman legionnaire or the feast of the Vikings? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see in the comments. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into the past.